Good afternoon. Welcome. So help me out here. So who here is a survivor? Oh, look at that. Excellent. You know, one of the nice things about being, I'm looking around here, I've seen crutches, I had that. I've seen a cane, I had that. Actually, way too much hair, actually, for a survivors group. A couple of you don't. I actually saw someone pushing an IV drip as when I just walked in here an hour ago. So it's great. And one of the nice things about being a survivor is you actually get to tease people who have those kind of lightweight cancers, who don't have very much treatment. I kind of love getting thyroid cancer. You're kidding. One little procedure and a pill and you're done. It just seems, it hardly seems fair. Anyway, I'm very happy to be here, and I think on a Survivor's Day, being a survivor, getting to use those words, being happy to be here in and of itself is special. Now, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and when I was 4 years old, my parents moved to a new neighborhood in our town where all the streets were named after Confederate war generals. We lived on Robert E. Lee Boulevard. I'm not making that up. And when I was 5, my parents gave me an orange Schwinn Stingray bicycle. Now, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. You have the swooping banana seat and the ape hanger handlebars. I didn't really, not until I typed this into Google a couple of years ago did I realize that 2/3 of Americans had a Schwinn Stingray bicycle in 1970. And the handlebars, they were called ape hangers, which I'm sure my mom did not know that meant they were modeled after hot rod motorcycles in the 1960s. Anyway, so one day I was exploring this neighborhood when I came across this little cul-de-sac that was a great discovery, and I wanted to get back there quickly, so I very purposely decided I was going to make a U-turn in this giant street that bisected our neighborhood, and wham, I was hit by a passing sedan. My mangled bike flew in one direction, my mangled body flew in the other direction. So I was lying there on the pavement across that yellow line, and one of my neighbors came running over, and I could still remember the shadow coming over my face, and she said, Andy, how are you doing?" Using the name of my older brother. "I'm Bruce," I said, and promptly passed out. I broke my left femur that day. It's the largest bone in your body. And for the next 2 months, I was in a wheelchair. And then, basically, for the rest of my life, I never much thought about my leg. And in fact, as some of you may know, I made a living by traveling, by going around the world and entering different places. And in fact, I wrote a book called Walking the Bible and hosted a television show by that name and wrote a series of books about these biblical adventure stories of mine. In fact, so for all the world, I was, in fact, the walking guy until 3 years ago this month. I took a routine blood test and I got a call from my doctor the next day that I had an elevated alkaline phosphatase number. I'd never heard of alkaline phosphatase. And in fact, I've since learned it's actually a test that most doctors don't even much trust. And she said, "Oh, it's probably naturally high." I went back, I took a second time, it was the same result. She then sent me to get a full body bone scan. Now again, since we're here among the survivors, I'm going to talk, I've had, in fact, for some of you who may have seen last week's issue of Time Magazine with Mehmet Oz on the cover talking about cancer, I had a piece in there about what it's like to get all these scans when you're in this world. So a bone scan, you lie strapped in this machine, and this giant machine that looks like a huge daddy long legs sends this huge metal plate over your body. It takes about an hour. And it showed that there was some sort of abnormal growth in my left femur. And that sent me, so it meant I had some tumor there. And as my doctor said, "Oh, don't worry, it's not like you have cancer or anything." So that sent me to an MRI and then to an X-ray. And then the next day I got a call from my doctor. "The tumor," this is what she said, "the tumor in your leg is not consistent with a benign tumor." Exactly, so I stopped walking, and it took my mind a second to convert that double negative into a much more horrifying negative. I have cancer. And to think that the tumor was in the same bone, in the same place in my body as that bicycle accident 38 years earlier. It seemed like too much of a coincidence. So that afternoon I went home, and I had gone to the doctor. They sent me to get some crutches to protect my leg. And I went home, and at the time my my wife and I were the parents of 3-year-old identical twin daughters. Now their names were and still are Eden and Tybee, and they were 3, and they were very much girly girls, right? They were into all things pink and purple. In fact, it was one particular pink tutu, one particular purple pair of tights, as I recall. And in fact, we called them Pinkalicious and Purplicious. But I should say that our favorite nickname came from when they were born on April 15th, 2005. Our otherwise grim, humorless doctor, when they came out at 6:14 and 6:46 that Friday night, the doctor looked at his watch and was like, tax day, early filer and late filer. The only friendly thing he said all year. In fact, the next day he came, since you laughed, the next day I said, doctor, that was a really good joke. He's like, you're the writer, kid, and back to stone face. Anyway, so on this day, they come in to meet me and they started doing this dance that they had just invented where they kind of twirled faster and faster and faster until they tumbled to the ground, laughing with all the glee in the world. And I crumbled. I kept imagining all the walks I might not take with them, the art projects I might not mess up, the boyfriends I might not scowl at, the aisles I might not walk down. Would they wonder who I was, I thought? Would they yearn for my approval, my love, my voice? A few days later, I woke with this idea of how I might give them that voice. I would reach out to 6 men from all parts of my life and ask them to be present in the lives of my daughters. My girls will have plenty of opportunities in their lives, I wrote to these men. They'll have loving families, they'll have welcoming homes, they'll have each other. But they may not have me. They may not have their dad. Will you help be their dad? And I said to myself, I would call this group of men the Council of Dads. Now, as soon as I had this idea, I decided I wasn't going to tell my wife, okay? And I think many of you can understand this. There is this whole idea in this culture that when you face a tragedy like cancer, you're supposed to kind of happy your way through it, right? Oh, focus on the positive. How many people say, focus on the positive, focus on the positive? So I figured my wife is a very upbeat person naturally. She grew up outside of Boston. She's got a big personality. She's got a big smile. She's got big hair. Although she told me recently I couldn't say she had big hair because people think she's from Texas. And somehow it's okay to marry a boy from Georgia, but it's not okay to have hair from Texas. In fact, if she were here right now, my wife would interrupt and she would point out that it was her decision to get married in Savannah. I come from Savannah, and it's a historic place. And so she said, we should get married in Savannah. I want my friends to see it. And this is a drop-dead true story. When we went to get our anybody here married in the state of Georgia? Anybody been to the state of Georgia? Okay. All right. Anybody been to Savannah? Come on, it's beautiful. It's halfway between here and Florida. Okay, anyway, so when we went to get our marriage certificate in the state of Georgia, there were 3 questions on the application. The third of which was, are you related? This is true. And my wife, she was horrified. I was like, look, in Georgia, well, at least we want to know, right? In Arkansas, they don't even ask. But, and what I didn't tell her was that if she said yes, you get to skip the 1 month, get to know you. Anyway. Okay, so Linda, she's happy, so I figured I'm not going to tell her. But I really couldn't, the idea kind of took over my mind, and so I couldn't control myself. And so the next day I told her, and I have to say, she loved the idea, but she quickly started rejecting my nominees. So it turns out that starting a Council of Dads was a very efficient way to find out what my wife really thought of my friends. She would say, oh, well, I love him, but I would never ask him for advice. Anyway, so we decided that we needed a set of rules. And so we came up with a few rules. Our first rule was no family, only friends. We figured our family would already be there, and as Linda likes to say, your friends know you differently from your family. Okay, so no family, only friends. Then only men. Okay, so probably half of my closest friends are women, but we figured we're trying to fill the dad space in the girls' lives, so we decided only men. And then essentially what we did was we kind of went through different parts of my life at different parts of my personality and tried to come up with a man who would represent different ideas. And then what happened was I had written this letter but instead of reading it to them, or God forbid, emailing it to them, I decided instead of sending it to them or email, I decided to read it to each one in person. Let's get to the point. And so they would come to see me over time. They live all over. And Linda joked it was like having 6 different marriage proposals, right? I sort of friend married each person. There was the candles, right? The flowers, the whole thing, right? Asking them to be in my council of dads. And the first person I asked was my friend Jeff. Now Jeff, he grew up in Vermont, and he took over the student travel company that his parents started. And I went on one of these when I graduated from high school. It was a gift from my grandmother. And on that first week, we were in Holland in this youth hostel in an old abandoned castle. And so I snuck out at night, and there was a moat, there was a fence, and there was this giant field of cows. So Jeff came over, and he sat down next to me, and he's like, "Hey, ever been cow tipping?" I was like, "What?" He's like, "Cow tipping, cows sleep standing up. So if you approach them downwind, you can push them over and they go splat in the mud." So before I had the chance to figure out whether this is real or not, we had jumped the moat, right? We had scaled the fence, we were tiptoeing through the dung, and we were approaching some poor dozing cow. So Jeff, he ultimately went back to Vermont, took over this student travel company that his parents started, and he spent, even to this day, he spends probably half of his time driving around on a tractor, shoveling manure, and half of his time exposing kids to communities all over the world. And this is what Linda and I wanted him to convey to our daughters, what it means to come from a place, right, where you know your neighbors, and yet be open to the rest of the world. Jeff would teach them how to travel. So a few weeks after my diagnosis, we piled everybody in the car, we went up to Vermont. Jeff and I went and we sat under this apple orchard, and I read him my letter. "Will you help me there, Dad?" And I got to the end, and he was crying, and I was crying, and he looked up at me and he said, "Yes." I was like, "Yes?" I kind of had forgotten there was a question at the heart of the letter, and though I have to say, though I keep getting asked this question, it never occurred to me that anybody would turn me down under the circumstances. And so then I did something that turned out to be key in this whole experience, which I asked Jeff a simple question. And his answer was so great, it's really what compelled me to write this book about this journey, which was to gather these answers into one place. And that question was, if you could give one piece of advice to my daughters, what would it be? And Jeff's advice was, be a traveler, not a tourist. When you go on a trip, get off the bus, seek out what's different. As Jeff put it, approach the cow. So I said, okay, it's 15 years from now. My daughters are taking their first trip, and they come to see you. What advice would you give them? He said, I would tell your daughters to approach a trip as a young child might approach a mud puddle. You can bend over and look at your reflection in the water and maybe run your finger and make a little line. Or you can jump in and thrash around and see what it feels like and what it smells like. And as Jeff was talking, he had that glint in his eye I first saw when we were behind that youth hostel in Holland. The glint that said, come on, let's go cow tipping. Even though we never did tip the cow. Even though no one tips the cow. Even though cows don't sleep standing up. He said, I want to see you back here, girls, at the end of this experience, covered in mud. 2 weeks after my diagnosis, a biopsy confirmed I had a 7-inch osteosarcoma in my left femur. 600 Americans a year get an osteosarcoma. 85% of them are under the age of 21. Only 100 adults a year get this disease. 20 years ago, they would have cut off my leg and hoped, and there was a 15% survival rate. But they discovered in the 1980s that one particular cocktail of chemo could be effective, and very quickly I went down that regimen. And I had what doctors call, and maybe many of you had it also, what doctors call a chemo sandwich, which involved 4.5 months of chemotherapy. And so in fact, as long as we're in a cancer crowd, I had 3 drugs. I had cisplatin, I had doxorubicin, and then I had very, very high dose methotrexate. And by the way, just a question about chemo. Why is it that all chemo drugs sound like comic book villains? You know, we've just failed cisplatin, and here comes methotrexate over the. You don't get that many chances to use chemo jokes. Anyway, so I had 4.5 months of chemo, and then I had a 15-hour surgery in which my doctor, my surgeon, Dr. John Healy, took out my left femur and replaced it with titanium. Took my fibula from, I'll step over here to talk. He took my fibula from my calf and relocated it to my thigh, where it now lives. He actually, is this thing even on, actually? Yeah, it sounds like it's on. So they took my fibula from my calf, actually devascularized it in my calf, so it took out 4 blood vessels. Plastic surgeon did that during the surgery. Then they moved it to my thigh and they grafted it to the good parts of my femur that were left, my knee and my hip, and then they revascularized it. So that fibula is actually now living inside my thigh, and then they took out 1/3 of my quadricep muscle. This is a surgery so rare, only 2 human beings before me have ever survived it. And my reward for surviving it was to go back for 4 more months of chemo. It was, as we referred to it in my house, the lost year. And from the beginning, as so many of you know, we worried about the girls and what this experience might mean to them. And you know, we did have some nightmares on occasion, but I have to say, at the end of the experience, our thought was that perhaps our daughters became maybe an ounce more compassionate, a dose more caring, right? They would rush to see the girl with the amputated leg at the playground. Or we used to have this kids book with rabbits, and one of them was on crutches, and they were, oh, just like Daddy's on crutches. One day, my daughter, she captured this sort of intensity of family that we experienced during this year. She said, Daddy, I have so much love in my body for you. I can't stop giving you hugs and kisses. And when I have no more love left, I just drink milk, because that's where love comes from. And one day my daughter, Eden, the other daughter, came to my side of the bed at about 4:30 in the morning. And as I got up to put her back to bed, as I lifted my leg out of bed, she reached for my crutches and handed them to me. And if I could cling to one memory from this year, it would be walking down a darkened hallway with my 4-year-old daughter at 3 in the morning with 5 little fingers grasping the spongy handle underneath my hand. I, of course, didn't need the crutches anymore. I was walking on air. Now, one wonderful thing about the Council of Dads was that it forced me to sit down with my closest friends and tell them what they meant to me. And I came to realize how rare this really is. You know, there's something in our world today where we have our family and we have our work, but somehow our friends keep getting pushed aside. And in so many ways, that's what the Council of Dads has come to mean to me and to so many other people I've heard from, is that it's this bridge that invites our friends into what's meaningful into our lives. And particularly men, I have found, have a much more, they're much more communicative. I mean, women have been fascinated by this whole idea. She's like, oh, you mean men have friendships? Like, and my wife kept saying that the things that these guys and I would talk about during this year, she's like, it's exactly what the women talk about at school drop-off. And I think that women keep saying to us, it's like, oh, that's what you people talk about when you go fishing? Or that's what you do when you're behind the locker room door? And to me, nobody captures this modern manhood more than my friend David Black. Now, David is my literary agent, and he is, it should be said, he's from New Jersey, actually just up the road. He's 5'3½", on a good day, in cowboy boots, standing on his tiptoes. In fact, the first time I ever met David, he was sitting in a chair in his office, and I walked in, and he's like, if I were your height, I'd be in the NBA. You know, delusion is a wonderful thing, but in an agent, you know, it's actually pretty good. So David, you know, in a lot of ways, David captures this modern man, you know, this modern manhood. So in some ways, he's an old-fashioned man, right? He answers the phone, "Yo, mother," and I won't finish the thought, but you get the idea. So, and he gives very boring speeches about obscure bottles of wine. And on his 50th birthday, he bought himself a convertible sports car. Although, like a lot of men, he's impatient. He actually bought it on his 49th. But on this modern manhood front, he leaves work early to coach Little League. He hugs. He bakes. I mean, someone asked me if David cried when I asked him to be in my Council of Dads. I was like, David cries when you invite him to take a walk. So David is an agent, as I said, which means he's a broker of dreams in a world where most dreams don't come true. And this is what Linda and I wanted him to capture for our girls. You know, what it means to seek out great ideas, but what it means also to handle disappointment. David would teach them how to dream. So what's the most important thing you can give to a dreamer, I asked him. He said, a belief in yourself. I said, okay, well, that's fine. But when I first came to you, I didn't believe in myself. I had written a number of books. I had no visible means of having this career work. I was at a wall. He said, I don't see the wall, and I'm going to tell your girls the same. Don't see the wall. Of course, you may encounter one from time to time, but I'm going to help you get over it, around it, through it, or under it. But whatever you do, don't succumb to it. So it's 20 years from now, I said. My daughters come to you and say they have a dream. They want to run a marathon, or open a restaurant, or write a book. What do you tell them? He said, let's take that dream and let's make it mundane. Let's make a business plan for that restaurant, or a workout plan for that marathon, or a map to the top of that mountain. And if that dream should fail, I said, he said, then we'll find another dream that works. Because anybody can dream an impossible dream, but only a few find a dream that's possible. And those are the ones that are happy. So as this whole process went along, we ended up with a number of people in my council of dads. It was my oldest friend, my camp counselor, my college roommate, my business partner, David, I just was speaking about, a close confidant. But Linda kept saying, you know, there's somebody that's missing, who's someone who sees the world in color like you do, not just black and white. You know, you need someone who will teach the girls how to see. So that person ended up being Josh Ramo. Now Josh, he used to be an editor at Time Magazine, and he moved to China, and now he advises companies. But he's that person, you know, who he puts on a business suit and, you know, works with companies during the week, but then he puts on a bomber jacket and rides a motorcycle all the weekend, or takes a rented plane and does acrobatic stunt flying, or goes off and spends a week working with Mother Teresa at her mission, and then shows up at Thanksgiving just when his mom thinks he's cleaned himself up with a beard, you know, and a scraggly t-shirt. He's sort of, in fact, it's sort of become a little bit of a problem. We kind of call him irresponsibility dad. He's the only one who doesn't have children. And like recently he came to go trick-or-treating with my girls. Okay, if those of you are parents, you get the idea, right? It's 9 o'clock, we've had enough, brush your teeth, let's get to bed. He's like stealing a candy bar from the thing and handed it behind my back. So like we can't leave him alone with my girls. So I said, okay, so you want to teach them how to see what's the most important thing to appreciate beauty? He said, I want to teach them to memorize Shakespeare's sonnets or Auden poems. So wherever they go, they have a companion for an afternoon. I want to teach them to listen to Mahler symphonies so they can hear the same music over and over again. I want to teach them to appreciate what's around them. And I told them this story. We were on a plane not long before we had this conversation in my hometown of Savannah, in a tiny plane with about 25 other people, when shower after shower came through the area. And the plane kept getting tenser and tenser and tenser. And then after a while, the clouds parted, the rain stopped, and the most perfect storybook rainbow appeared in the sky. And my daughter Eden was the first to see it. She's like, oh my God, a rainbow. I've never seen a real live rainbow. Tabby, look, it's so beautiful. I can't stand it. And everyone on the plane burst into applause. And Josh said, that's what I want your daughters to know. There are everyday miracles around us all the time. And sometimes it just takes a difficult situation to make us learn to appreciate them. Our home in Brooklyn is not far from the Brooklyn Bridge. And during the year and a half I was on crutches, it became this kind of symbol to me, this open road. So one day near the end of my journey, I said, come on girls, we're going to take a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. So we set out. Linda was beside me, I was on crutches, the girls were ahead. They were doing these kind of Mick Jagger-like rock star poses they had just learned. You know, because I lost the ability to walk so early in this journey, I spent a lot of time thinking about this most elemental human act. I mean, humans have been walking for 2 million years, and yet in so many ways, the act has never exactly been improved. As my physical therapist likes to say, every step is a tragedy waiting to happen. You stumble with one leg, then you catch yourself with the other. And the biggest consequences of being on crutches is that you're forced to walk slowly. You hurry. You get where you're going, but you get there alone. You go slow, you get where you're going, but you get there with this community you've built along the way. At the risk of admission, I was never nicer than the year I was on crutches. And that act of pausing becomes a very powerful thing in your life. 200 years ago, a new type of pedestrian appeared in Paris. He was called a flaneur, one who wandered the arcades. And it was the mark of these men of leisure that they would take turtles for walks and let the reptiles set the pace. I love this ode to slow moving, and it became my own message to my daughters. Take a walk with a turtle. Behold the world in pause. And every now and then, stop entirely. We got to the top of the Brooklyn Bridge, and we sat down. There were all these bikers and joggers running about. It was like rush hour at noon on a Saturday. And I opened up my knapsack, and I pulled out a small cloth, 4 saucers, 4 cups, and a tea kettle. And at just after noon, on a Saturday afternoon, with the Empire State Building to our right and the Statue of Liberty to our left, for no other reason than we'd reached the end of a very long year, we tilted that kettle, clinked our glasses, and held a tea party on top of the world. So this idea of pausing, as I said, may be the single biggest lesson I took from my journey. There's a quote from Moses on the side of the Liberty Bell. Proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It comes from this passage in the book of Leviticus called the Holiness Code. And that passage, it says, every 7 years the land should lay fallow. And every 7 sets of 7 years, the land should get an extra year of rest, during which time all families are to be reunited and all people surrounded with the ones they love. And though I'm still shy of 50, that experience perfectly captures my own experience with cancer. My lost year became my Jubilee year. In fact, that year is called the Jubilee year. It's the origin of that term. So my lost year became my Jubilee year. We were surrounded with the ones we love, and it became this excuse, this mandate to reunite with the ones around us. On the 1-year anniversary of my diagnosis, I went to see my surgeon, Dr. John Healy. By the way, if you're going to have a doctor, Healy, a really good name for a doctor. So he's this very kind of colorful man. He wears bow tie. He grew up outside of Boston. He's an Irish Catholic kid from Boston. He wears these little tiny candy stripe bow ties, but he has this fascinating and occasionally incredibly frustrating habit of speaking 3 words every minute. And when you're a patient and you're hanging on every word, you hang for a very long time. So I went to see him. By the way, okay, so he is the president of the International Society of Limb Salvage, which is like the least euphemistic name I've ever heard. And it's exactly what he did to me. He salvaged my leg. So I said, okay, doctor, if my daughters came to you one day and said, what should they learn from my experience, what would you tell them? He said, I would tell your daughters what I know, and that's this. Everybody dies, but not everybody lives. I want you to live. Not long ago, we had the Council of Dads together for the very first time. It was my daughter's birthday, and they came from all over the world, one at a time, through our front door. And the first thing I thought was, each of them bought in bigger, and it was my girl's birthday, I think I said that. It was each one of them bought a bigger and bigger present. And I was like, well, no wonder my daughters love the Council of Dads. They have scored. And what was powerful to see was that my girls knew them not just as my friends, but as their friends. They now have an independent relationship with each one. It's kind of been a small burden for these guys. Maybe once or twice a year they do something. But there's 6 of them in my case. And that means if they do something once or twice a year, that my daughters get something every month. And so that night we sat around and we had dinner. And we all talked about what we had learned from the experience. And one friend of mine, Ben, he's kind of question Ben. His motto to my girls was live the questions. And he said when he first heard the idea, he rejected it. He wanted to believe I was going to get better and I wouldn't need the Council of Dads. And he said, today I realized that I was wrong. We all need to have a council of moms or a council of dads. We all need this community in our lives. And like so many of you here, every regular schedule, now I'm up to 3 or 4 months, I go and get scanned. And not long ago I went in to have my regular scans and I wondered what I would say today when I got here. And I'm pleased to say I'm now 2 years since the end of my chemo, 3 years since my diagnosis. I'm cancer-free. As you have seen, I was on crutches for a year and a half. I was on a cane for 9 months, and now I walk with some effort, but I do walk. And so I stand here today, and I just want to say, at the end of this experience, I sat down and I wrote a letter to my girls, which appears at the end of the Council of Dads, in which I listed all of the wisdom that I had learned from my dads, some of which you've heard here and some of which you can encounter later. Live the questions, approach the cow, pack your flip-flops, tend your tadpoles, don't see the wall, harvest miracles. And when I looked at this list on the page, I thought to myself, you know, it was meant for my girls, but maybe we're the ones who really needed it. And that's really been the secret of the Council of Dads for all of us, is that Linda and I did it for our girls, but it really changed all of us. And so I end here today with a message. May you find a mud puddle to jump in someplace. May you find an excuse to harvest everyday miracles around you. May you find a way to get over, around, or through any wall that stands between you and one of your dreams. And every now and then, find a friend, find a turtle, and take a long, slow walk. I write a monthly column in the New York Times Style section called This Life. And this morning, sort of in honor of my being 3 years cancer-free, and I wrote a column that grew out of the following conversation. I sat down, my wife and I are having dinner with some friends, and we sat down, and this friend of ours, the woman of this couple, she sat down and she ordered a stiff drink, and I didn't really think of her as the stiff drink kind, if you know what I mean. And then she leaned over about halfway through and she said, my sister has a brain tumor and we don't know what to do. So what advice would you give us? And so I wrote an article that in my head I've been calling, as I've been working on it, Cancer Rants. And basically the idea is when we had twins, we thought it would be all hands on deck, right? Instead it was everybody run the other way. You're on your own, see ya. And when I got cancer, we thought it would be everybody run the other way. Instead, it was all hands on deck. It was this incredible moving experience. People did wonderful things for us. Our siblings opened up a casserole club so people could send us meals over the internet. People wrote letters. My high school reunion made a big poster. But lots of people did things and said things that were, if I might, a little annoying. So what I have today in the New York Times is a list of 6 things you should never say to a patient. And 4 things you should, okay? So I figure with this crowd, let's see how these go over. Okay, so my first one is, what can I do to help? Okay, it's a very well-meaning expression, but the truth is, as I quote the head of Livestrong, is saying, it puts the burden back on us, okay? So my advice to people is, don't ask, just do something. And by the way, the more mundane, the better. You really want to help? Unclog my sink, right? Unpot my dead plants. Change my oil, take my dog for a walk. So really, it's like I say to people, don't say, what can I do to help? This one, okay, my experience, lots of people say they're thinking about you. It's a wonderful thing. Lots of people say they're praying for you, which is also a wonderful thing. But in my experience, when people say, my thoughts and prayers are with you, empty cliche. Okay? It's like, if you really do it, that's fine, but most people just fall back on it. And so my thing is, stop saying this. We should retire thoughts and prayers are with you to that list of hackneyed expressions like, I'm stepping down to spend more time with my family. Or like Anthony Weiner, I'm sitting down to spend more time with my family. Or it's not me, it's you. Okay? Number 3. Oh my gosh, okay, I bet this crowd will love this one. Number 3, did you try that mango colonic I recommended? I got the longest list of recommendations, right? If you just put turmeric under your fingernails and stand out in the shower and turn around 3 times, you'll be cured. It cured my Uncle Louis. And the only thing worse than getting these turmeric, anybody gotten the turmeric email that's going around? Yes, exactly, thank you. The only thing worse is these people follow up. Okay, and the chairman of my wife's board, my wife runs a nonprofit, sent over a book, then sent over another one, then called to find out why I hadn't read it. And I quote a friend of mine who's had 7 recurrences of a soft tissue sarcoma. She was in the Time Warner Center in Columbus Circle, and a friend came up to her and said, you don't know me, I'm a friend of your wife's, but why aren't you wearing that Kabbalah bracelet I bought you in Israel? Okay, so number 4, everything will be okay. A friend of mine who had brain surgery said to this, is that people, they want to make you feel good, but the truth is they're trying to make themselves. She said, people would say, you're doing great. You know, you look, you know, everything's going to be fine. And she was like, really? That's not what my doctors say. So we know that those lines, okay. Then might have, oh, right, this is good. How are we today? Right? Let's make a bowel movement, right? Anything where you speak to an adult, anything where I had actually in there, should we make a wee-wee today? But my editor took it out. Anything that makes an adult feel like a child, right? You know, just especially if you have living parents, as I had when I was particularly gone. My mother would make me like, I haven't had a bologna sandwich since I was 13. You know, it's like just as the Livestrong, Doug Ullman, the head of Livestrong, said to me, you know, just because we have cancer doesn't mean we still don't have strong opinions. And then so women in particular, I didn't necessarily feel this way, but women in particular said, you look great, that they really grew to hate that you look great. Again, they're trying to feel good, but it kind of reminds people. So my 4 recommendations for what to say are, number 1, don't write me back. You know, if you do something, if you send me, I for one felt a huge amount of guilt about all of the letters and the emails and the cards. Do I have to respond to all of them? So my line here in the paper is, you know, chicken soup is not a wedding gift. It shouldn't come with more added stress. Okay, number 2, great thing to say to a patient, I should be going now. Right? Those 5 words can be great. You know, if you visit somebody, don't stay too long. And by the way, when you leave, tidy up the dishes and take the trash out when you go. Number 3, would you like some gossip? Okay, I mean, I say here, follow the lead of the patient, but in my experience, patients get tired of telling the same stories over and over again, right? We have to talk to the nurses, to the doctors, to the henchmen from the insurance company, and just because we have cancer doesn't mean we don't have a comment about Anthony Weiner, right? Or Lindsay Lohan, or the election, or whatever it might be. So a little gossip can distract. And then last, as I say here in the paper, I love you. Just a direct expression of emotion. I'm sorry you're going through this, and I hope you get better soon. Congratulations. Happy Survivors Day. Thank you very much.